know are that Beryl is actually hitting Texas at the moment in the United States. And we understand from the reports more than 1 million customers are without power, and state disaster declarations were made ahead of the landfall in 121 counties. There's also another report that a man died after a tree fell onto a house in Harris County in Texas as Beryl makes its way north through the states, the officials are reporting. So we're watching to see it's a category 1 upon hitting Texas. We're joined now by the Minister of Finance, Dr. Nigel Clarke, just to find out some updates on catastrophe bond and the various avenues of funding available to us post Beryl. Minister, good to have you on the hotline.
Good to be here, Emily.
Yes, welcome. Yes, so I played for the listeners the audio that you sent concerning what is available to us, because you say the catastrophe bond is not triggered because we need a very intense category 4 or a category 5 hurricane making landfall for the cat bond to be triggered, right?
Yes, correct. The cat bond, let me just, if I can spend a few minutes on that.
Yeah.
The cat bond is the highest layer in our disaster risk financing framework, and it is designed in such a way that we've put a grid over Jamaica and over the surrounding waters, and each of those grids, the grids are of squares and triangles, and each of them is associated with a centralized air pressure. Now, for your listeners, the air pressure of a hurricane is inversely proportional to the intensity of the hurricane. What do I mean by that? The more intense the hurricane is, the lower the air pressure is. So each of those grids over Jamaica and the surrounding waters has an air pressure associated with it. And for the catastrophe bond to trigger, the path of the hurricane has to go through those grids and be lower than the centralized air pressure. So the trigger for the bond is observable by the naked eye. You just have to look at the National Hurricane Center. You see the track of the hurricane, and you see the intensity, you see the air pressure, and you can tell for yourself from your living room once you know what the air pressures are, whether it has triggered or not.
So what is that? Is there a magic number that we should look for air pressure?
Right. So the air pressure would differ over different sections of the island and over the water as well. But I'm going to give you more detail as I go on. So in the case of Beryl would have started out in the Eastern Caribbean, and you recall that at some point it was upgraded to Category 5. Its centralized air pressure was, and I'll give context so your listeners can understand, it was like 938 millibars, which is intense Category 5 hurricane. As it moved towards Jamaica, the air pressure increased, meaning intensity decreased from 938 to 945, 940s, 945. By the time it got into Jamaican waters within the grids over Jamaica in our cat bond, the centralized air pressure was 959, which was over the water where it entered was higher than the threshold required to trigger. If it had made landfall, the centralized air pressure to trigger the cat bond over, say, Kingston is 968. Over Clarendon is 960. So had the same Beryl make landfall in Jamaica. What do we mean by making landfall? What we mean by that is that the center of the storm goes over Jamaica. Right? Had that happened, the same Beryl, had the same Beryl traversed in such a way that the center went over any landmass in Jamaica, it would have triggered.
Well, why did you pitch it so high, the trigger point? Or which of the previous hurricanes? Tell me what is from Gilbert coming down to before Beryl. What was our experience such that we had hurricanes with that air pressure making landfall that would justify the high trigger point that we have?
Okay. Well, the first thing, there's a major difference, Emily, between a hurricane making landfall and not, and that is what we're trying to protect against. Anybody who has seen the I don't know if anybody, there's a video going around of the wind at Monroe College. Somebody videoed the hurricane itself, right? And when you see the ferocity of that, and you take into consideration that the center of this hurricane was still 50 miles south of Monroe, right? I think we're if you're realistic about what a Category 5 or high Category 4 making landfall in Jamaica really means, you'll understand why it is that we just cannot leave ourselves exposed to it. So the thresholds, Emily, over, say, where we have, let's say a Kingston or a Montego Bay, the thresholds there are quite high, meaning a lower intensity storm would trigger them. The threshold is like 960, which is, Gilbert would have triggered that. I mean, remember, Gilbert was a storm that went over Jamaica. Remember, Gilbert was not as strong as many, many, many hurricanes that we've had in the last 30 years. But the difference is Gilbert was a much weaker hurricane, but the difference is that it went over Jamaica, and that's why it was so devastating.
But if Beryl remained south of Jamaica, so didn't make landfall, and got up to the intensity of about 960.
No. If it got down to the intensity of, say, 940, 945, it would have triggered.
Oh, but you said Kingston's intensity is about 960. So if it hit Kingston at 960, but it didn't make landfall.
Okay, let me go again. So just imagine, and I'm going to tweet some charts out to further understand it. And I encourage and I encourage the interest and applaud the interest that everyone has. So I will make some more information available to make sure that everybody can understand the protection that we have.
Yes.
So just imagine Jamaica and the waters around Jamaica, and just imagine you divide all of that up into squares.
Yes.
Some of them might be triangles, right? What we have are centralized pressures for each of those squares. Now, clearly, where you have a lot of the word that we use in the industry uses, where the aggregate sums of potential losses are highest, you want to make sure you have, the air pressure you use. You want to make sure that a lower intensity storm could trigger.
Yes.
So you take Kingston or Montego Bay, where we have hundreds of billions of dollars of installed, assets.
Yes.
Right. We don't we're not waiting for Category 5 to go over Kingston for it to trigger. A high Category 3 would trigger if it went directly over Kingston. You understand what I'm saying? Because we're using an air pressure there of 960, which is not the most intense storm at all. In fact, 960, would be maybe just about where Beryl was. So if Beryl came over Kingston, it would have triggered. Or Beryl
so
came over
I get that.
Bay.
What I'm trying to understand, is it a twin criteria you're dealing with, meaning landfall plus whatever prescribed air pressure, or if you have air pressure at the prescribed level but the hurricane does not make landfall, will it trigger?
No. You're close, but there's a little nuance. No, the trigger for the hurricane, where you're correct, is there are two criteria. One, it has to go through one of the grids, and two, when it goes through the grid, the air pressure has to be lower than the threshold. Now, the grids are on the land of Jamaica and around the surrounding waters. So it does not have to, where I saw a newspaper report in the Gleaner, again, if they just took what I had written in my release, they would have been correct, but they tried to editorialize it, certainly in the opening paragraphs, and they got it wrong. The hurricane does not have to make landfall for it to trigger. Okay? It can trigger if it is off the coast. But what I said in my release, so I want to get that very clear, right? The Cat 1 can be triggered for a hurricane that goes that where the center goes, traverses through the southern or northern waters of Jamaica. And it can trigger if it goes through the land mass of Jamaica. So the path has to go through one of those grids.
Okay.
But in addition to going through one of those grids, the centralized air pressure, when it goes through the grid, has to be lower than the threshold for that particular grid. The way in which the cat bond is designed to make it affordable, clearly, is that the grids vary, right?
Yes.
I mean, the air pressure varies according to the grid and according to the sum insured that we have in each grid, so to speak.
So this grid. Let me just understand. Outside the perimeter of the landmass Jamaica, how far out in the water, the Caribbean Sea surrounding Jamaica, does the grid extend? Is it like 40, 45 miles or 40 miles out there?
Yes. It goes, Beryl came through the grid. I'm going to WhatsApp you some grids here, Emma, so at least you can see.
Yes, I can appreciate that.
So the grids extend south of Jamaica.
40 miles out?
Or more. 60 miles, 70 miles, something like that.
Okay.
So what I said in my release is that had Beryl if Beryl's path was exactly the same as it has been, but it did not, the intensity was not lowered as compared to what it was in the Caribbean.
We're talking with Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clarke, understanding firstly how this catastrophe bond is triggered so that we can have access to a payout. We're understanding that Beryl has not triggered it, and so we're trying to find out why. So Minister Clarke, you sent me a grid a moment ago which shows that the entire island of Jamaica and parts extending in each direction out into the Caribbean Sea, that those form part of this grid that you are talking about. And a grid, listeners, is just little squares around the island for certain miles extending out to sea beyond the land mass of Jamaica. So you're saying if the eye passes anywhere along this grid around Jamaica, or in, of course, on the landmass itself, and it's at air pressure which has been decided and which has been placed in the fine print of the catastrophe bond, then a payout could come under those circumstances.
Yes. So further for your listeners, there are 19 grids.
Yeah.
And about 10 of those grids cover the landmass, and the remainder of the grids cover the waters around Jamaica, north, south, east, and west. For the cat bond to trigger, the center of the hurricane has to pass through at least one of these grids. And when it passes through that grid, the air pressure has to be lower than the specified air pressure, which is not fine print, that is big and bold. And by air pressure has to be lower, what we're saying is that the intensity has to be higher than a particular threshold. Now, let me just give you some context. Hurricane Ivan in
2004,
which has been the most devastating hurricane to traverse through the waters of Jamaica since Gilbert, did not make landfall in Jamaica. Hurricane Ivan, the center of Hurricane Ivan went through the south of Jamaica, very much like Beryl. But Hurricane Ivan had an air pressure of 926. Right? Hurricane Ivan was an intense hurricane. It was a Category 5, and it caused immense damage across Jamaica, not in one or two parishes, but across all of Jamaica. This cat bond was structured in such a way that Hurricane Ivan would have triggered it. Hurricane Dean, which came 3 years later, similarly, the center of Hurricane Dean did not pass through Jamaica. Hurricane Dean went to the south of Jamaica. Its air pressure was in the high 920s, low 930s. and Hurricane Dean, based on its path and based on its intensity, would have triggered the cat bond. Hurricane Beryl, however, went on a similar path, and by similar I mean just south of Jamaica, to both Ivan and Dean. But Hurricane Beryl was a much, much, much weaker storm than either Ivan or Dean. As I said earlier, the centralized air pressure for Hurricane Beryl was in the 960s.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the point I made in my release is that had Hurricane Beryl, with the same centralized air pressure in the 960s, had it gone over the landmass of Jamaica, it would have triggered the cat bond.
Okay.
But the threshold over the water is lower than the threshold over the land for obvious reasons.
Okay, so it's not a landfall issue.
No, it's not. No, I was just making a point that had the same Hurricane Beryl go over the land, it would have triggered.
With the centralized pressure it brought.
Yes. But with the same relative weakness, and by weakness I mean relative to Ivan and Dean and others, had the path been exactly the same, but had it been as strong as it was when it was over the Caribbean, it would have triggered. Which is why that's why when we began to get worried that this thing could be it clearly is devastating in St. Elizabeth, in Manchester, in Clarendon, and so on. But it could have been a national devastating event was when we saw the intensity of it in the Caribbean and saw the path. That was where we got really worried.
But let me ask you though, St. Elizabeth,
yes,
based on its upward turns a bit to the north, did it not come in the grid and at the centralized air pressure required to trigger the bond for St. Elizabeth? Could it happen like that, where a parish benefits but not others?
Right. So it as I mentioned earlier, it went through those. It went through the grids at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but by the time it went through those grids, the air pressure was very high compared to the threshold air pressures. Meaning,
yes,
as I said earlier, the air pressure by that time was in the 960s.
Yeah, but if this is so, then Minister, it's like no nail is to be left in St. Elizabeth or any part of Jamaica for us to actually ever get any money from the cat bond.
No, that's not the case at all. What are we trying to cover with the first? I want you to. What we're trying to cover with the catastrophe bond, is an intense hurricane of an intensity that the other resources that we have on hand are not enough to address.
Okay,
that is what we're trying to cover. We're not simply trying to buy something that triggers for every hurricane. First of all, that would be unaffordable. We would not be able to afford such coverage, and that's why what we have is layers of cover. So if you notice, Hurricane Beryl has triggered all of the other layers, and we need to get to that in a moment to talk about the CCRIF policy. It has triggered, by triggered, what I mean is the money is available, right? We have money available from our contingency fund, from our national disaster fund, we have money available from the contingent credit claim, and the tropical cyclone policy with CCRIF has also triggered. Right? I've said that now 3 times on the public domain. I don't think it has been carried yet on any. No,
we have, and I played it this morning in full. Okay, so we will get to those. Okay. Yeah. But let me ask you. Go ahead.
So 4 of the 5 layers have triggered.
Yes.
This is exactly what we expect for a hurricane that is not of the highest intensity. It is not expected, nor is it designed that it's going to trigger all 5 layers.
Yes.
It is intense enough, however, to trigger 4 of the 5 layers.
Okay.
We could easily have a storm that does not trigger the CCRIF policy. We could have some rain and whatever that does not trigger the credit contingent claim. Right? So what we want to do is to make sure we have the resources on hand to respond to the disaster as it occurs. With the triggering that has happened, with the passage of Beryl and the triggering of those 4 layers, we have the resources to respond to the emergency expenditures, the relief and recovery that is required. And that is, full sort of demonstration that the disaster risk framework is working. Okay. And the measure of it working is not that the cat bond triggers. The cat bond is there to trigger, and I'm repeating myself here, is there to trigger for hurricanes where we don't have the resources to respond to them because the damage is so extensive.
So great. Okay, got you. Yeah, so all of these different funds now that we're going to talk about, they are layers of the catastrophe bond?
No, they're not. They're different instruments.
Okay,
right?
That's what I understood, that they're different.
Let me, if I can use, an analogy, right? Let's say you have some kind of barometer that goes from 0 to 100. You'll have a policy that triggers if the barometer measures 20. You'll have another policy that triggers if the barometer is between 20 and 50. And another one that comes in if it's between 50 and 70. And then one that only comes in if the barometer goes up, to 80. Right? The cat bond is the kind of instrument that only triggers if the barometer reads 80.
Okay.
But if it reads 65, which is less than 80, we have other instruments that cover that outcome.
So we understand the instruments to which you make reference, the contingency fund and the national disaster fund. You say about 4.5 billion we'll have access to under those two.
Yes.
And tell me now, when you say have access, how soon will we get access to this 4.5 billion?
Well, the 4.5 billion represent funds that we have put aside, all right, rather than
everything's supposed to work.
A few years ago,
yes, everything's supposed to
we
work.
had the discipline and, if I dare say, the foresight to take money out of our budget and put away in an account at the Bank of Jamaica for situations like this. Meaning that we have been saving towards these kind of occurrences, and the total, I'd have hoped it was the total now is 4.5 billion. That is represented by cash sitting at the Bank of Jamaica. We have immediate access to it. I must, however, say that it doesn't mean that we spend all of it, Emily, because we are at the beginning of the hurricane season. In school, we learned June too soon, July stand by, August a must, September remember, October all over. This was almost a June too soon hurricane. So we still have July stand by, August. We still have July, August, September, and October to go, and it would not be wise to leave ourselves totally exposed to anything that comes our way in the ensuing month.
Based on the assessment, how much you think you will take out of these two funds, out of the 4.5?
It's too premature to say that right now, but we're too premature to say that. We will get to that hopefully later in the week.
Okay.
But in addition to those,
I want you to come back. I need you to come back and tell me about the other two, because you did say you'd do some checks over the weekend to find out, I believe, about tropical cyclone, and we want to hear about the contingency credit claim with the IDB. Give us some minutes after the headline so you can clear those up for me. All right. Thank you so much, Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clarke. So CAT bond is not available to us because it didn't fall within the grid at the centralized air pressure that is required for the catastrophe bond. That's the big payout. But there are other funds available, he says, and we will find out about two more of those after the headlines.
No problem.
Right. So based on what you've put out, there are other possibilities for us getting money for the recovery after Beryl. And you tell us of two particular ones. There is the tropical cyclone. Tell me about that one first and how much we can access after you had your talks over the weekend.
Yes, so let's put it in context just to where we left off. We have a multi-layered suite of instruments. At the bottom layer, that one is available for all storms. The layer above that for storms of a particular intensity. The layer above that, you have to be more intense, and so forth. We have triggered 4 of the 5 layers, and here we're talking about the 4th layer, which is our insurance policy with the Caribbean Catastrophe Reinsurance Facility.
Mm-hmm.
We have a tropical cyclone policy with them, and we have received the policy notice that this policy has triggered, and there will be a payout of approximately 16 million US, or at today's exchange rate, approximately $2.5 billion. And this is additional to the other layers that we discussed earlier, where resources are available, from which resources are available.
Right. So that's under the tropical cyclone policy, 2.5 billion.
Yes.
And excess rainfall policy, anything on that yet?
Excess rainfall policy, nothing on that yet. We await final calculations on that one.
Yeah, the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Fund, who is that with?
The Caribbean Catastrophe Reinsurance Facility is essentially a CARICOM organization owned by the Caribbean government. It provides. Let me rephrase that. It's housed in St. Lucia, and it provides natural disaster insurance to countries in the Caribbean and in Central America, and even I think on the northern tip of South America. Heavily supported by our bilateral partners, such as Canada. We've provided great assistance to CCRIF, as well as our multilateral partners, including the World Bank. And we have policies with them, such as excess rainfall, tropical cyclone, and we have an earthquake policy with them.
Okay. So this 2.5 billion, firstly, under the cyclone, tropical cyclone one, that becomes available when, and how is it going to be used? Right.
So we have confirmation today. I believe that it might take a few weeks for the resources to be delivered. In terms of how it will be used, again, I won't be able to specify that right now. Our focus is going to be on relief efforts, meaning the persons who are affected and areas that are affected, as well as recovery. And what recovery means, making sure we can get all aspects of the economy, all aspects of society back on track to our pre-Beryl status. That's how funds will be spent, as well as probably preparing for other disasters and making sure that we don't leave ourselves vulnerable.
So individual household or homeowner who's lost a roof or had damage to particular items of furniture, will they be getting any specific donation to rebuilding their homes?
I believe the Prime Minister will speak to that in greater detail later. But as I said, relief is going to be a priority, and relief means people who have been affected, who are in need. We'll find some way to address some of the needs that they face at this time.
Right. We hear as well about a contingency credit claim before the Inter-American Development Bank.
Yes.
What, have you accessed that?
Yes, the contingent credit claim is the third layer in our multi-layered framework. And what this is, we will never, Emily, be able to provide all of the sort of traditional insurance or cat bond protection, etc. It would just be, just too costly to provide all the funds that we need. So we have a diversity of instruments, and one of them is called a contingent credit claim, which is a credit product. It does have some grant facilities that come with it, but it's a credit product, a loan product that's negotiated, years in advance, and it just stands there. And if there is a disaster, you can draw it on immediately. The advantage of it is that the funds are available within days or within a week, and the terms are all hammered out long in advance. And so you're not in a position where you're scrambling, trying to get a loan underwritten, trying to negotiate terms, trying to negotiate the policy conditions, what laws you have to pass to get the loan, right? Trying to get board approval, trying to get cabinet approval. If you were to start from scratch today to get a loan from a multilateral, it could take you 6 months.
Right.
Right? So what this is pre-financing that is available. We just have to say, look, we are interested, and they run the calculations to make sure that the fund, that the claim is triggered by the intensity of the storm, and then the funds become available. We have $46 billion available under that facility. We'll see how much of it, is actually available on the Beryl. Not all of it is available because it depends on the intensity of the storm, and they have to run their models to determine. And then we have to determine what our needs are.
Yes.
Again, we want to be very prudent. Emily, we want to have, to have the national confidence that we can have a conversation about resources that we have on hand without feeling compelled to exhaust them if there isn't a need to exhaust them.
Got you.
Because we have to prepare for the future.
What's the interest rate under the contingency credit claim?
I'm not. You got me there, but it's going to be a very concessional rate. It's not anything near market rate.
Right.
It'll be just a few points.
But so based on what you've told us, you have now approximately $7 billion that's available to us. One under the tropical cyclone policy. You've got the policy notice this morning, plus the $4.5 billion under the contingency fund and the National Disaster Fund. So you're saying when the assessment is done, we'll figure out how much we really need to draw down, how much we really need to use out of the $7 billion that's available, bearing in mind we're early in the hurricane season as well, yeah?
Correct. And I want to, for your listeners, make a distinction. There's 3 phases that we need resources for, right? One is relief, and relief is almost immediate. The hurricane passes. There is damage to critical infrastructure. The roof of a hospital is blown off, etc., or serious damage to people and lives. So there's relief. Then you have recovery, which is getting the country back up to the pre-natural disaster level of production and activity, right? So clearing roads, moving trees out, restoring power, restoring water, restoring telephone, etc. That's recovery. Yeah, and then you have reconstruction. Now, reconstruction is the longest phase, and that can go, way into the future. And reconstruction is such that your disaster funds, your disaster financing funds are not for reconstruction. In other words, you can't. No, well, let me rephrase it. It is not possible for you to put aside enough resources to provide for all the all the damage that a hurricane can cause. Clearly, right? If you get a Category 5 that hits Grenada, the damage was, 200% of GDP. Right? There's no way for you to put those resources aside. But that is not what the real problem with dealing with disaster is. Not the reconstruction so much; it's the relief and the recovery. I give you the analogy of Hurricane Gilbert. When, I don't know if you recall, Emily, you're too young. But
I was quite active in Hurricane Gilbert.
I know, I'm teasing you.
Yes.
You remember this plane that was in the willow trees on the way to the airport? And any of your listeners can just Google Hurricane Gilbert plane in tree, and the image will come up because it has achieved immortality. It was so powerful that it hoisted a plane into the air. It landed in a tree, and it stayed there for what must have been what seemed like weeks. All right, it stayed there for a long time because it was not, it was not relief. It was not emergency. Yeah, in a disaster, you have emergencies, as we can see as we look across the landscape. And what we want is to have the resources on hand to deal with emergencies and to deal with recovery. Reconstruction, you can plan. You can, put that into budgetary forecasts and put it in your public investment program and plan as to how and when you're going to reconstruct that. That in a way that does not interrupt or put your fiscal trajectory off track.
Let me ask you this, because as you talk about the recovery mode, is the government prepared to advance any sort of support financially or otherwise to JPS to help with the reconnection efforts across the island still outstanding?
Okay, that's a tricky one. The resources of the government are not intended to subsidize private companies. JPS is a private company in which the government has an interest. To the extent that JPS needs resources as a private company, it can get resources in a private market, private credit markets, or it can raise money from its shareholders, which includes the government. If there were a call for raising equity from shareholders, then yes, the government could participate in that. But regular sort of subsidies to a private company, that would not be the first call on resources. Yeah, that wouldn't be the first call.
But with the impact of on productivity, of the absence of electricity, and the obvious need for assistance in parishes like St. Elizabeth and so forth, what sort of support can government provide even for private entities such as the Light and Power Company?
Let me tell you something that we are, yes, what we can do, Emily, JPS had a challenge with their LNG facility, which is a major production facility. LNG is highly flammable, can be a dangerous fuel, and it's stored in a floating vessel off the coast of Clarendon near to the plant. When the hurricane began to make its way, that vessel filled with LNG had to leave for safer harbor. Having a vessel filled with liquefied natural gas in the midst of a hurricane could create a disaster of its own. Having that vessel leave Jamaica, JPS had to switch to ADO, which is diesel oil. And diesel oil does not benefit from the same doesn't have the same tax benefits as LNG. And the reason for that is that it's dissuasive, right? We don't want JPS to have the incentive to use ADO, right? Because ADO is more expensive for Jamaica.
Just hold on for me. Just hold on. I'm so sorry. I have to take a break and come back, Minister.
Quote by Renew. JNGI online.
My JNGI is
15 before 11.
You're now listening to Emily Shields Talk with Substance on Hotline. Radio Jamaica, active for the good of our nation.
Thank you, listeners. We're back with Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clarke. We're in the recovery phase. He's saying that there are different phases: relief, recovery, reconstruction. So I've asked him what sort of support can the government provide to JPS. He's acknowledged JPS is a private company, so it's a bit tricky to do that. But he's giving us a scenario in which support has been had by JPS from the government. You're talking about the LNG and then the diesel oil, Minister.
Right. So let me just say that obviously JPS is under the portfolio of the Ministry of Energy, and I think they have been doing a good job in updating the public on the return of electricity. What falls in my domain, as I was explaining to you, that the ADO is a less attractive fuel for Jamaica, and so there's a disincentive for JPS to use it, and therefore the tax considerations are different. In the advent, however, of a natural disaster, when due to no fault of their own, LNG is not available, right? For the safety of Jamaicans, the LNG storage vessel has been moved out of Jamaican waters. The JPS has reached out to say, could we favorably consider providing a waiver on the use of ADO to power their station to the benefit of the Jamaican consumer. And that is something that we are favorably considering.
Okay.
So that is something that the government can do, government is inclined to do. And I'll issue something more definitive later to confirm that that's the direction we're moving in.
What about for NWC?
Well,
It's our company.
NWC is a fully owned Jamaican entity. And again, that falls under the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. And again, I believe that they've been doing a great job in getting that back on track and informing people. But, we could look at things that making sure that the pumping stations have generators and possibly go out and procure some of those. There's, things like that can be done to aid the recovery effort.
Yes. So, based on the policy notice you've had concerning the tropical cyclone policy, give me an idea as to whether in the new dispensation, in the new insurance cycle, we're going to be looking at increased premium for that one. Or how do the premiums go? Who pays? I know you say Canada and the World Bank have some input.
No, the premium we pay. But I know that Canada has provided a lot of assistance to
yes. How much do we pay? We pay per year, per month, quarterly, what? Under the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Fund.
We pay annually.
Yes.
For the Caribbean Catastrophe, we pay a premium annually. I don't have the figure on me, but it's certainly over $1 billion. It's
over $1 billion Jamaican.
Yes.
And
over. I don't want to be.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah, it's in that. It's over $1 billion, between 1 and 2. I can't remember exactly how much it is.
And how long now have we been paying the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance?
We have been paying that for several years, and we have even increased our limits. Here's the thing about insurance, though, Emily. Again, the CCRIF is the fourth layer, right? So the first layer has to trigger, the second has to trigger, the third has to trigger, the fourth. Some natural disasters will only trigger your first layer. Some will trigger your first and second. Others will trigger your first, second, and third. And some, like Beryl, will trigger first, second, third, and fourth. And then, God forbid, we don't want. I know everybody wants to see the cat bond sort of triggered, but we really don't want that to Emily.
No, of course not. I know
because the reason why we have it is that we cannot leave ourselves exposed to that kind of damage. But if you could guarantee me that it's not going to happen, then we wouldn't need it. If you could say to me, there's no way next year we're going to have, a high intensity category 4 or category 5, then, we could do away with it. Anyway, I went off track.
So this 2.5 billion payout that we're getting under the tropical cyclone, this is a trigger of what level of the policy?
The policy has a limit of $80 million. It's 20% of the policy limit.
Okay. So it's a very low level trigger then?
Yes, it's a low level trigger. Consistent with what we know about the storm.
And I was asking you, so we pay premium annually of about $1 billion for
it's
that.
Over $1 billion.
Over $1 billion. Do you anticipate there will be an increase with the payout we are now getting of $2.5 billion?
So you mean, let's say we kept the coverage exactly the same, whether there will be more, it will cost more?
Yes.
I'm not. Let me say this: interest rates have as much of an impact on premium, right, as probabilities. And it might be that when we come to renew, we're in a different interest rate environment,
yes,
which counteracts or acts as which neutralizes any sort of risk-based increase. But remember that these models that either the CCRIF who provide that insurance or cat bond investors, the models that they use are based on 100-year databases, right? The databases of 100 years of storms emerging in the Atlantic and making their way across the Caribbean. So it's unlikely that one event, and especially an event that is not, while terrible for sections of the island, it's not devastating on a national basis.
I understand, but the point is at the moment you don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
but I'm giving an opinion that's unlikely to significantly impact it.
All right. So I suppose later on in the week you will be able to tell us how much you're using out of the $7 billion that is now available to you for recovery effort. Yeah.
Yes. So we might, just to make listeners aware, just to be clear, right, we may, allocate or reallocate aspects of the budget. That's always a possibility. So when we talk about how much, I'll be very clear when I speak about what our expenditure is going to be, what the sources of it are, right? So some sources will be from disaster risk financing sources. Others will be, from, other things that we have to do with the budget. So I'll be very clear on that.
Okay.
One thing that we have to, as I've been at pains to point out, we've got to leave something, right, in the event that there are other natural disasters to come our way between now and November.
Okay, so I suppose whatever we spend now, bearing that in mind, we may have some sort of supplementary budget post-November to do whatever else is left. Yes, to rethink. Yes. All right. I have to go. I had a caller last week, though, who complained that in your constituency, you're in Northwest St. Andrew, yeah?
Yes.
That there is a gully in the vicinity of Maynard Avenue, Hemingsway, Crescent, Milton Avenue to Shakespeare. That gully has never been cleaned, and he theorizes it's because those people really don't vote Labour. But there's another gully, Sherlock Gully, that is always clean, and the people up close to Sherlock Gully, they vote Labour. Can you say anything about those two gullies?
I heard about that call when it occurred, and I checked it out. I got in touch with the councillor for that division. Clearly, we have an organization of 3 councillors in my constituency with whom I work very closely. And, he informed me that was not an accurate portrayal. The drains that are selected for cleaning are drains that are in need of being cleaned. And there are some drains and gullies that get affected more than others. And there has been a response to drains that need to be cleaned. And to the so
he says the one at Maynard Avenue, it needs to be cleaned, and it has never been cleaned.
Well, that's not true that it has never been cleaned. That's not accurate.
You know when last it was cleaned?
I wouldn't have that information on me, but as I said, I checked with the councillor. Yeah, remember, I'm not.
I love to talk to the councillor, Minister. If you can send me the contact for the councillor so I can get some more specific details, I'd be grateful. Yeah?
Sure. But
yeah.
That was a very mischievous claim.
It doesn't matter. I can only say the mischief of it when I get the facts that I want from the councillor. So please let me have that information, will you?
No problem.
All the best to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, you're welcome. Finance Minister Nigel Clarke.